So welcome everyone. Thank you for showing up today for Stamp Talks. Um, I want to thank Ed for spending some time to organize a talk and volunteering to help out. And I want to thank everyone for showing up. This is something that the Royal Philatelic Society Canada puts in, and we're hoping everyone could participate. I also want to thank Sparks Auctions for helping us out by sponsoring us, and you can go visit them at sparks-auctions.com. So today's speaker is Ed Kroft. He's the president of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your talk. So over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for all the work that you do. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your own personal schedules to attend. This is a 90-minute presentation, roughly, and I'm going to share a screen with you and put it up on the screen, and we'll get started. And the title of the presentation is Uncommon Destinations for Mail Sent from Palestine during the British occupation of Palestine between December 1917 and May 1948. And you'll note that that is the focus of the presentation. I like collecting this area because there's a huge challenge factor. It's difficult to find certain destinations that you're going to see in this presentation. And I like the postal history associated with the mail going to these presentations. I like the geographic knowledge I've acquired, the historic knowledge, the philatelic knowledge. So I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I do as we go through the presentation. Now, as I mentioned, the driver in the presentation is the actual destinations. I don't care if mail was sent by surface or by air. The key for me is what destinations the mail was actually sent to. I will talk about rates as part of the presentation, but one of the overall concepts here is to think about how all this mail survived given the exotic destinations to which it was sent. Now, in the course of putting my material together, I had to reflect on whether or not the countries to which mail was sent were members of the Universal Postal Union. And in doing so, I had to determine whether the destinations were sovereign states, were they colonies, were they protectorates of other sovereign states, were they possessions of sovereign states. And these concepts, protectorates, territories, possessions, colonies, they're concepts in international law which dictate the status that's to be accorded to these different places. And often the status is dependent upon how much self-government these particular places actually have. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the postal history of Palestine during the British occupation between 1917 and 1948, there first was a military administration that dealt with various matters. That occurred in 1917 through 1920, beginning in 1920 as a result of the conclusion of the Treaty of San Remo following World War I. There was a civil administration that was set up, and that was in accordance with a League of Nations mandate that was accorded to the British. In other words, they had the ability to look after, so to speak, the area of Palestine at that time. Now, as I mentioned before, the postal relations were between Palestine being occupied by the British, so in effect, the United Kingdom, and other countries which were members of the Universal Postal Union. So you knew that mail was going to reach these destinations in one way or another. Now, why did I choose the word uncommon for purposes of this presentation? Friends of mine who've seen the presentation were worrying about whether or not I should call this exotic or rare, scarce, weird, unusual, unique destinations to which mail was sent. And I chose the word uncommon because of factors such as geography, size of the population, the fact that mail didn't travel to these destinations in any regular manner. And overall, I chose to call a destination uncommon if it was one to which mail was seldom sent at a particular point in time during the 31-year period under review, or alternatively, it was always the subject of not being sent on a regular basis. So those are the criteria that I relied upon for purposes of classifying things. Some of you might be surprised by what I call uncommon, and obviously I welcome your questions, as Joe has suggested. Now, whenever I do a presentation, I always give credit to people and to sources of information. There are various auction catalogs that I had reference to that have a number of the material or a number of the pieces that I'm showing referred to. I am grateful to various people who gave me the benefit of showing some of their material in the course of this presentation. And I'm dedicating this presentation to an extraordinary philatelist, Dr. Leslie Bard, who was an airmail and aerophilatelist collector. He had an extraordinary knowledge of the aerophilately of Palestine and collected a lot of rare, unusual destinations as part of his overall collection before he passed at a fairly young age a number of years ago. Now, first I'm going to deal with the Middle East, and a lot of you will say, okay, that's really strange that it would start with the Middle East as an uncommon destination, because mail must have traveled from Palestine. Here's Israel shown on the map, so it's a more modern map, and we have a number of countries in the area that are shown. But first, let's start with Aden, which was a British Crown colony found in the south of Yemen, near the Gulf of Aden. And here's a cover that was sent from Jerusalem to Camp Aden in October 1937. You see an arrival postmark on the back. You see it's addressed to Aden Camp. This was a place where British soldiers actually were situate. And you see Palestine stamps. Now, in the course of this presentation, there are 3 different types of Palestine stamps you're going to see. These stamps that are before you are called pictorial stamps because they show pictures of various parts of Palestine that were reflected on the postage of Palestine. They were first issued in 1927, and as it turns out, this cover was actually sent in 1937, so 10 years after the stamps were first issued. We're also going to see some other types of stamps that I'll show you and comment upon as we move along. Here's another cover that went from Palestine to Aden, and it's a commercial cover. What's so interesting about this cover is it's subject to the all empire rate, which was, in this case, 10 mils. Some of you will know, in the case of Canada or the UK, that there was a uniform rate that was established in 1938, roughly until World War II, that mail throughout the British Empire could be sent at. So, and Palestine was among the countries or the places which could take advantage of the all empire rate. So what's so nice about this cover, it's an all empire rate cover from Palestine to Aden, in effect showing a very low airmail rate because of the status of Palestine as a member of the British Empire. Now we're going to move to Bahrain, and some of you will go, where's that? And here's a world map to show you where I'm looking. And here is, once again, a mail going from Palestine to a UK protectorate. And oil was a big deal in Bahrain. And this is a 25 mil. Mil is the denomination of the currency, MILS, in Palestine at the time. So this is going to a Wali. This was going by KLM, so it was an airmail cover. You'll see the censorship tape on the side. It's a commercial cover going from a department store in the coastal city of Haifa to Bahrain Island. Here's a cover going to Iraq. Now, some of you will say, well, Palestine's close to Iraq. Why was mail to Iraq so unusual? And remember that Iraq at the time was under UK administration as part of Mesopotamia. The reason I put this piece in is because airmail was in its nascent stage at the time, and this is a very early airmail cover going from Palestine to Iraq, and as a result, there's a great deal of heavy postage. In other words, there were surcharges for airmail back in 1923 because it wasn't done in the ordinary course. In other words, mail didn't travel that way in the ordinary course. And the stamps that you see here are called typograph stamps. That was the method of printing that was used, and they were used prior to the time that the pictorial stamps were issued in 1927. And on these typograph stamps, you'll see a reference to EEF, which is the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, which captured Palestine from the Ottoman Empire during the latter stages of World War I. Here is a cover that's going to Beirut, Syria. And some of you will go, oh, Ed, don't have fun with us. Beirut, Syria? Isn't Beirut in Lebanon? And the answer is, of course, Beirut's in Lebanon. But at one time, Palestine was considered to be part of what was known as Greater Syria. So therefore, there were people who still referred to the area of what is current day Lebanon, current day Syria, and Palestine as Greater Syria. And this is a cover that's going from Jerusalem to Beirut in 1933. I had to question whether or not this was going to Syria or whether or not it was going to Lebanon. And I looked at the back stamp, and making out the back stamp, it did say it was going to Beirut. It was going, in terms of the Arabic, it was going to Lebanon and to Beirut. So bottom line is, that's where it went to from Palestine. It is a surface letter rate. And the thing to note, as I say on the slide, is Beirut was the capital of Lebanon under the French mandate of the League of Nations, and Lebanon got its independence in 1943. So sometimes what we see on covers isn't always true. We have to do our historical research in order to figure out, based on the rate and any other markings on the cover, where the cover actually was going to. Now here's a cover that's going to Lebanon in 1947, and it's going from Bethlehem. And you'll see a beautiful postal history cover. It was first addressed to Tripoli, which is in Lebanon, and then it went all over the place. And it actually went over to Libya, to Tripolitania, because sometimes people confuse Tripoli in Lebanon with the country which became Libya in Africa. And this arrived in 1947 after many travels. Now here's something unusual, seeing a cover from Palestine to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia at the time was getting into oil. You'll see the address on the commercial cover to the Arabian American Oil Company. It is a commercial cover, 1947, going by air from Palestine to Saudi Arabia. Another cover going to Saudi in 1947. This is an entire, you see the embossed stamp paying for registration. The amount of the postage is much greater because it was actually double weight in these circumstances. It's registered out of a smaller location called Ramleh, and the person to whom the entire was addressed had left. You'll see the Arabic writing. And throughout this presentation, you will see different languages. You will see English, you will see Hebrew, you will see French, you will see Arabic, because of the different types of inhabitants who lived in Palestine at the time. Now here's a cover actually going to Syria in the circumstances. And once again, some of you will say, are these common destinations? And it's difficult, hard to believe, but true, to find mail from Palestine to places like Transjordan, to Syria, to Lebanon at times. So that's why I've actually put them in to demonstrate that to you. And this is a registered cover going from Haifa. You'll see the Arabic on the cover. There was a large Arab population in Haifa at the time, in the 1930s, in the 1940s. I just skipped over it. And it went to Damas, Damascus. So that's why it's going to Syria, which was under the French mandate of the League of Nations. Now here are a couple of covers to Transjordan for 1939, 1928, both pictorial stamps. They're both surface mail, or they're printed matter in the situation, inland postcard. So those are the lower rates that are paying the postage, and it's going to TJ, which is Transjordan. Now let's move out of the Middle East and go to North America. And when we go to North America, you'll look and you'll see there's Canada and there's the United States and Mexico. And obviously, this is not a map that's contemporaneous with the Palestine British Mandate, because you see reference, for example, to Nunavut at the top. But I grabbed this map for convenience to help me out. And I also have Hawaii on this map and Alaska. And you're going to see how that plays into my demonstration in a few minutes. First, Palestine to Alaska. And some of you will say, well, you know, there's probably a lot of mail that went from Palestine to the United States. And that was actually true. However, finding mail that actually went to a US territory at the time, remember, Alaska didn't become a state until 1959. So this is going to Gambell, Alaska. It's a postcard from Palestine in 1938. Really, really tough to find. It's the only piece that I've ever seen going to Alaska. Now here's a piece that I've written about in some journals. This is a unique piece. It's the only one reported, and it's going from Palestine to Prince Rupert, British Columbia. And some of you will say, well, wasn't mail from Palestine to Canada reasonably routine? And the answer is at times it was. However, in the latter stages of World War I, there was little, if any, mail going from Canada to Palestine and vice versa. And the reason is because there was a stoppage of mail service between Palestine and Canada, because remember, the Ottomans were the ones who were controlling Palestine, and they were on the wrong side in World War I, and I call it the wrong side. They were part of the Central Powers with Bulgaria and with Germany, and obviously they weren't on the side of the English and the French and the Canadians and the New Zealanders and the Australians at the time. So what's extraordinary about this piece is there's a back stamp here that's actually showing that the letter miraculously got to Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Whether or not it got there on the Grand Trunk Railroad, you know, which was going into Prince Rupert, whether or not it got there by ship, going across the country and then going up the coast by steamer, you know, remains to be seen. But this is a postmark coming out of an army post office in Jerusalem in 1918. And you see on the back stamp that it was addressed by a Mr. Gutstein to his son, Mr. Gutstein, who actually was a merchant in Prince Rupert. The only recorded cover going from Palestine to Canada at that time. Here's a cover from Palestine to Hawaii. And for those of you who've been to the island of Maui, you'll know how beautiful it is. And I guess there weren't many people living there because it went to Mrs. Spruill, care of Mrs. Dorset in Haiku. You know, not much of an address. And here are these typograph stamps that I showed you. This is a letter paying the foreign letter rate from Palestine, and it's going to Hawaii halfway around the world. Probably went by ship all over the place, and it's addressed out of Haifa, 1921. Here is a postcard that made it to Hawaii, and this is going to the Big Island. No, actually not the Big Island. This is going to the island of Oahu and out of Jerusalem. And a friend of mine saw this card and he said, oh, I've got a place right down the street. And he went and looked to see what the house actually looked like, to see if it was still there. And he said, you can see on the internet a picture of the house that's still there. And you see the message that these people were enjoying New Zealand, Australia. They spent time in Palestine, and they're on their way to Africa. So the people who wrote this postcard must have had a lot of free time and a lot of money. Here's a letter going from Palestine to Hawaii. And the reason I put it in, aside from the fact it was traveling via the United States to the territory of Hawaii, it's addressed July 1941. So it likely arrived in Hawaii very close to Pearl Harbor Day, you know, in December of 1941, just given the amount of time it took for surface mail to get there. And there is no arrival postmark, but this cover obviously survived. And there is censorship markings that are noted on here because the war was going on. Now, I mentioned we're in North America, and this is Palestine to Mexico, going to Monterrey. And this cover's got a huge amount of pictorial postage. It's written in Arabic, albeit that the outside is written in English. It's going to Monterey, and it went by the Clipper service via New York. So this had to travel in 1941 in August, really around the world, because Italy was blocked off by virtue of its entry into the war. We haven't had the Japanese coming into the war against the United States yet. So this is really going from Palestine down to the bottom of Africa, across India, Singapore, across the Pacific Ocean, and then ultimately going to New York, and then back down to Mexico. So it's no surprise that this letter looks really beaten up. It came out of Bethlehem. It's got censor tape on the side. Now here's a beauty, the only one that I know of, and that is Palestine to Newfoundland, when Newfoundland was a crown colony. 1944, it's going to Deer Lake, pays the foreign surface rate, and as far as I'm concerned, tough to find. I asked John Walsh once, had he ever seen a piece going from Palestine to Newfoundland or Newfoundland to Palestine? He hadn't, to his recollection. So I'm very happy to have this piece. Now we're going to move on to Europe. And a lot of you will say, gee, why would Europe have uncommon destinations given the fact that it's fairly close to Palestine? Well, let's take a peek. Here's Palestine to the Aegean Islands, a Greek possession going to the island of Rhodes. It's an airmail cover going on Alitalia Airlines. Here's Palestine to Albania, triple weight surface mail registered in the city of Tiberias, which is on the large lake in northern Israel, northern Palestine at the time. These are the pictorial stamps that I talked about. 1927, paying a triple weight, and it's sent by a stamp dealer, of course. That's why the postage is so fantastic. But look at the transit markings on the back. It's going through the railway station in Italy and Bari, and all on the way to getting to Durazzo in Albania. Here's a letter to the free city of Danzig. Now, some of you may know that Danzig is Gdansk, which is now in Poland. And the letter went by airmail, registered out of Tel Aviv by Lot Airlines. And it's going to Danzig, the Free State, which was a free city. It went in 1937. The Germans marched into Danzig to take it over. And it lost its free state status, its independence. But at the time, it was still a free state. And there are collectors who look for mail to Danzig for that reason. Here's another piece, an earlier piece, 1921, with pictorial stamps registered out of Jaffa, going to Danzig. If I was being appropriate, I would have put this piece first, and the second piece, the one you just saw second. This is a registered letter, as I mentioned, and it pays for registration and it pays for foreign surface. Here is Palestine to Estonia. Estonia was a place which the Nazis marched into, the Russians marched into. The Jewish population in Estonia was eliminated effectively. The Germans called it Judenfrei. They called it Jewish free on all their maps because they had eliminated the population. So finding a mail from Palestine to Estonia is somewhat rare, particularly as the years march on towards 1941. And I'll just make a footnote at this time, or a sidebar. People have asked me when they've seen my collection about uncommon destinations, how much of it was mail written by Jews or by Christians or by Muslims? And the answer is there's a real mix. A lot of mail that came out of Palestine was written by Christians who were visiting the Holy Land, and not necessarily Jews, because there wasn't a large Jewish population to any extent in Palestine. There were some, and mail did flow to various American cities and some other common destinations. But some of the rare destinations were written, or the mail was written by people who were not Jewish. They might have been Muslim, they might have been Christian at the time. Here's another piece. It's a parcel card, has beautiful postage, very heavy postage, coming from Tallinn, transiting Göteborg, In Sweden, it's going to Finland, I think, on this one. No, it's going Tel Aviv to Tallinn, pardon me. And it was insured, so you've got value déclaré, which is always wonderful to see on a parcel card. You see a parcel card marking on the back as well. And here's the arrival postmark. It's 1941, sorry, it's 1939, 1940, when things are actually getting there. Now here's Palestine to Finland, registered cover, 5 times weight. Very nice cover with pictorial stamps. It's an early airmail cover out of Palestine. It's 1933. So that's why I put it in going to Finland. An unusual destination, Palestine to Gibraltar. It's a commercial cover. It's going to a passenger on a ship who was traveling on a steam navigation company in Gibraltar, foreign surface rate, various transit markings, and that pays the transit postage for the foreign surface. Palestine to Greece. Mail to Greece from Palestine wasn't unusual, but at all times, but this is very unusual because it's sent to the island of Chios in Greece. And the other part of it was, aside from the fact it was sent from one of the Christian convents located in Jerusalem, there's a return to sender because the Nazis left in October of 1944, and then the Greek Civil War broke out in November of 1944, and this is a postcard that's addressed on Remembrance Day, November 1944. So it's probably not a surprise that this postcard never got there. The postage was correct in the circumstances, so they wouldn't have been refused for that reason. Here's a heavier cover with lots of postage, registered airmail going to Piraeus in 1946 with lots of transit markings through Cairo and other places out of Palestine. And this did hit the mark. There's an arrival postmark because the Civil War was over at the time and things had gotten back relatively back to normal from a postage perspective. Now here's Palestine to Guernsey in the Channel Islands, Jaffa to St. Peter Port. It's an air letter, so that's why you've got different postage, 25 mils on it. Interesting, it's going to the Guernsey Philatelic Society, and there's the CI for the Channel Islands. Palestine to Iceland, very hard to find. Here's it actually paid the printed matter rate rather than the foreign postcard rate. And once it got to Iceland, it was then rerouted over to Denmark, and it was sent from the city of Tiberias. Palestine to Iceland once again. You saw here, this was a typograph stamp. Now we have the pictorial stamps being used. It's 1947, going to the capital of Iceland, and the airmail rate was 60. What happened was the person went to the post office, put only 55 mils on the cover. There was a marking which indicated the person had to pay 5 more. So the next day, another 5 was added and the marking was wiped out. This did happen in Palestine from time to time when people went to the post office. Palestine to Ireland. These are typograph stamps, and it's going from the town of Surafend, and it's going to Dublin in this particular case. Very nice registration markings through London, beautiful skeletal postmarks out of Palestine, transiting Haifa and the Kantara traveling post office. Beautiful pictorials on this particular cover, and it paid the appropriate double weight going to the Irish Free State. And when I talk about the Irish Free State, then we have, when does the Irish Free State end? December 29th, 1937. So before we saw some surface mail going to Ireland, now we've got airmail going to Ireland from Jerusalem to Dublin to Trinity College. It transited Haifa in these circumstances, and it did pay the appropriate rate going on Imperial Airways, an early cover on Imperial. Palestine to the Isle of Man. For those of you who don't know where the Isle of Man is, here's where it sits on a map of the world, or at least of Europe. and a beautiful postal history cover going to the married aliens internment camp in the Isle of Man, because you did have Germans interned in the Isle of Man. This was a letter written from Palestine in German, registered, appropriate pictorial postage, paying the appropriate rate plus registration, transiting Haifa, Tel Aviv, and it's going from Ramat Gan, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv, going to these people who were likely interned. Well, they were interned based on the address on the cover. The Isle of Wight. I knew about the Isle of Wight because I remembered the rock festival in the Isle of Wight around 1970. And I never knew that there was postage or mail going from Palestine to the Isle of Wight. And then I found one from a military post office in 1918, going from GM1, which was near Jaffa, near Jerusalem, sort of in between. And the writer in October of 1918 says, "Souvenir of Jerusalem visit." And there's the censor marking from the British forces in Palestine, but it is going to Cowes, the Isle of Wight. And that's a pictorial stamp. The other thing you see about the pictorial stamp, by the way, before I go on to the next piece, is that it is not overprinted. A lot of the pictorial stamp, a lot of the typograph stamps, this is a typograph. A lot of the typograph stamps we've looked at were overprinted Palestine. When they were first issued under the auspices of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force and General Allenby, who was the commander in the area, they were not overprinted Palestine. You'll see that they were in English, they were in Arabic, but there was no notation. They had to be overprinted with Palestine once the League of Nations mandate was established, and there was a difference between the mandate that was going to occur in other parts of the Middle East as opposed to in the Palestine region. Now we have a pictorial cover with triple weight air to the Isle of Wight from Jerusalem, 1938, so it's before the war. Now one of my favorite covers. This is a cover that's going to the famous person, Sua Altezza, His Highness Benito Mussolini in Rome, in Italy, going by KLM, 1936. And it's registered letter sent by Khalil Janho in Jaffa, and their different transit markings. Historically, what's interesting about this cover is some of you will know that the Mufti of Jerusalem, al-Husseini, threw in his lot with Mussolini and Hitler before World War II, and was plotting to try to actually help the Germans and the Italians to rid the area of the British for a variety of reasons. And he actually ultimately went to Germany to visit Hitler. And this letter was sent privato, it was sent privately. And this gentleman, Khalil Janho, it's believed, was one of the people who worked with al-Husseini. So I always wonder, since I've seen the letter cut open, what actually was written in this letter to Mussolini in 1936, which was around the time that al-Husseini was throwing his lot in with Mussolini and Hitler. Channel Islands again, not going to Guernsey, but going to Jersey. A couple of pieces, one 1938 going by, it looks it's going by KLM, but it ends up going on Imperial Airways to Jersey. And the other one is just an airmail letter going via England in 1947 out of Nablus, as opposed to going out of Tel Aviv. Palestine to Liechtenstein, which at the time was a sovereign state, 1947, registered cover going to Vaduz. Beautiful, colorful postage, the appropriate airmail rate to Liechtenstein at the time, and it also reflects the registration fee. Palestine to Luxembourg. It looked at one time as if it was going by airmail, but the airmail etiquette has 2 bars through it. And for those of you who are ardent aerophilatelists, you'll know that the 2-bar marking there indicated that it was only going to go by air as far as London, after which it was going to go by surface. So 1946, appropriate postage going to Luxembourg, and partly air, partly surface. Palestine to Malta, a UK crown colony. And what's interesting on this cover, aside from the fact that Malta is not a very common destination for Palestine, it's addressed to a gentleman named Sir Harry Luke. And Harry Luke was a British civil servant whom you will see come up many different times. And he was an official who served in Barbados, Cyprus, Transcaucasia, Sierra Leone, Palestine, Malta, Fiji, and other areas. So what's interesting here is watch out for Harry Luke. I don't know if he was a stamp collector, but he sure got a bunch of mail, which we're very grateful to him for, because it's helped us figure out when mail went to different uncommon destinations and at what rate. Palestine to Monaco, going by airmail, went through France, didn't fly directly into Monaco. This was the appropriate airmail rate, not that high an airmail rate, but transiting Paris. Palestine to Northern Ireland, going in this particular case to a soldier, redirected. It was going, of course, Northern Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. It was the 60-mile airmail rate. It was correct. 1941, it was censored because the war was on. The sender was in Gaza, and the letter was rerouted once it got there. Another piece going to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, registered out of Haifa. The postage, the reason I put one piece on and then the next one is because the postage actually went up afterwards in 1942. And this was sent by police officials in Palestine who were serving there, who were located in the city of Haifa. Palestine to Norway. I always love seeing postcards sent by airmail with the appropriate postage. In this particular case, this piece went to Norway, then it was redirected over to Hamburg in 1937. It went on Ala Litoria, it went on KLM. Palestine to Portugal. You see the typograph stamps, and I'm showing you the overprint for Palestine. Oh, by the way, when the stamps were overprinted, it was overprinted in Arabic at the top, English in the middle, Hebrew at the bottom. So a lot of these typographical stamps that are overprinted do have 3 languages. 1927, so these stamps were on the edge of the period of time that the typographs were phased out. Not very common to see mail going to Portugal from Palestine. This was going from the city of Jericho. Another piece which has pictorial stamps, much heavier, it's registered, it's a heavier envelope, and it is 14 times weight. So it might have been some commercial mail, some samples in here at the time. Very nice piece. Palestine to Spain. These are pictorial stamps. You see them overprinted again, a receiving cancel on the back, and it's coming from another philatelist paying the surface rate. First we had the typograph stamps, now we've got the pictorial stamps, and we see the marking on the cover OAT, the onward air transmission. So it went only as far as London, and then afterwards it was going to go by surface or possibly by air. So this is going from Haifa to Barcelona. There's the Spanish censorship over on the left side of the cover. 1945, so we're in the latter stages of the war. Palestine to the Shetland Islands. And for those of you who are saying, I don't know where the Shetland Islands are, but it sounds really great. Very unusual to see a piece to the Shetland Islands, which were part of Scotland. And this was going under the all-up rate, or the all-empire rate that I talked about earlier in the context of Aden. Similarly, here's a piece in 1938 with a 10-mil stamp paying the all-empire rate going to the Shetland Islands. Palestine to the USSR. The interesting thing about mail to the USSR is sometimes it got destroyed. It's difficult to always find pieces that did survive going from Palestine to Russia. This is from Tel Aviv to Moscow. What's notable on this cover, it's mixed franking. You have pictorial stamps and you have typograph stamps. Collectors of Holy Land like finding covers with mixed franking, and this is a good example of it. It's postmarked in July of 1927, which is when the changeover was roughly occurring between the typographical stamps and the pictorials. Postcard going to the USSR. Registered postcard, censored postcard, 1941, in the height of the war, and it's paying the appropriate postcard rate, but what's notable about it, it's also paying the registration rate. Again, finding registered postcards, sometimes very hard to find. Another piece, registered postcard, but this one's 1945. And what was interesting about mail from Palestine to the USSR at one point in time, depending on where the mail was going in Russia, it might transit Iran. So this particular piece has all sorts of censorship markings that deal, it has a Persian double circle censorship mark, it has a Soviet censorship mark, it has notations on the bottom that talk about it being returned in Russian. So, and then you see the English return non-reclamé. So nice piece, very high postage for a registered postcard at the time. Palestine to the Vatican, 1929. Now, this is not a 1929 piece. This is a 1924 piece going from Jerusalem to the Vatican, but it says Rome. And a lot of you will know that the Vatican was not established as a city-state until the execution of the Lateran Treaty in February of 1929. So finding pre-1929 mail to the Vatican is more difficult because you actually have to see the notation on the card, as distinct from this piece, which is a 1929 piece, December of 1929. Remember, February was when the treaty was concluded. 1929, it actually says the city of Vatican in Rome. And that's when it already become an independent city-state. It's registered in the circumstances, paying foreign surface plus registration. Palestine to Wales, part of the United Kingdom, going to Cardiff, paying the appropriate airmail rate. Palestine to the Kingdom of the Serbs, the Croats, and the Slovenes. Some of you will say, oh, wasn't this going to Yugoslavia? Because it's going to Belgrade? Well, the answer is in 1925, when you've got the pictorial stamp on this postcard, paying the postcard rate, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia did not actually exist until October of 1929. So the official name was the Kingdom of the Serbs, the Croats, and the Slovenes. Now we're moving to Africa. Palestine to Algeria, 1929, paying the printed matter rate rather than the postcard rate. Palestine to Algeria in the French territory in 1939, it's going on aleatoria, not a postcard, it's actually registered, censored in this particular case, because it's October 1939 and the war has started in World War II. Palestine to Basuto land. You say, where's Basuto land? There it is down at the bottom of Africa. And here's a piece, 1945 in May. And Basuto land, what is it today? It's Lesotho. So, you know, one of the fun things about doing the presentation and collecting this area is saying to yourself, what are these countries called today? It's great the mail survived, but are these dead countries? Are these countries that have new names? Have they consolidated? Palestine to the Belgian Congo, 1945, from a philatelic exhibition going to Leopoldville, registered. And it's got franking on it, which is supplementary franking in addition to the postcard rate that was paid in the circumstances. Palestine to the Belgian Congo, it's a heavier amount of postage in this case, going to the American Consul General. It's 100 mils rather than what you saw in the previous one, which was 65, including registration. This is going from the American Consul to American Consul, Palestine Consul, to Belgian Congo consul. Palestine to Chad, French Equatorial Africa. Amazing that this survived. It's noted to going AEF, Afra Equatorial Française, French Equatorial Africa, going to Chad, written in French. Eritrea and Palestine to Eritrea. So now we're on the other side of the country. And this is to Asmara in 1948. So where have we been so far? We've been over in Chad, and we've been over in Eritrea over here, and we've been up in Algeria up there. Let's keep going. Palestine to Ethiopia. Oh, who's this one going to? The King and Emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, in this particular case, 1944, registered out of Jerusalem. Now we're going to the Cameroons, which existed as a country under French mandate for 41 years, 1919 to 1960. So what do we have? A letter, 1938, from Jericho to the Cameroons in West Africa. It's got various transit and censor markings in the case. Another piece going to the Cameroons, the rate has changed. Before it was 15, it went up to 20, which is why I put the two covers in. It has an arrival postmark. It's indicating that it is going to Cameroon, and it's indicating in the top that it's coming out of Palestine. French Equatorial Africa from the Cameroons as well, through the French mandate, 1942. And this is a beautiful piece because aside from the 5 different countries that censored this cover, it has censorship tape on it. It has the correct postage. It routed through Egypt and Nigeria, and it took a while to actually get where it was going. Palestine to the Ivory Coast, 1943 to Abidjan, appropriate to postage, including registration, censorship. Palestine to Kenya, bottom of Africa now, commercial cover, Barclays Bank, going in 1940 via Imperial Airways, censored in Egypt. A lot of censorship out of Palestine was done in Egypt as well. Palestine to Madagascar. And you're going, Madagascar? You know, yes, there's actually a piece going to Madagascar. 1947, pays the correct rate from Tel Aviv to Majunga in Madagascar. And here's Madagascar over there. We're now going to the island of Mauritius off the coast. And here's a pictorial postcard, 1927, going to St. Louis or Port Louis in Mauritius from Palestine, from Jerusalem. There's a crag cancel there. And then here's a piece going to Mauritius out of Jerusalem in the middle of the war, 1942. Some of you may know that the British interned various people in camps in Mauritius. Mail was sent to Post Office Box 1000. And you see different transit markings out of Cairo, censorship markings, arrival postage in Mauritius. Another piece to Mauritius, 1944, different rate. You see a 15 rate on this one. On this one, you see a 40 rate. It's double surface, censorship markings on the cover once again. Palestine to Morocco out of Tiberias, 1921, with a typographical stamp on there, and it's actually overprinted, but the overprint is almost a silver color, so it's hard to see it. Palestine to Morocco, once again, this is what postal history is all about, why we love postal history. Look at how the cover was forwarded to different places. It was addressed to someone who was a French legionnaire. You know, if you want to use your imagination, it was sent to Humphrey Bogart after he left with Claude Rains in Casablanca. But, you know, here's a piece, 1940, and out of Tel Aviv. Now we're in French West Africa. We've already been in Chad before. And let's see where else we're going. We're going to Niger, from Nazareth to Niger, postcard rate, 1935. And it's it's Niger AOF, you know, which is French Equatorial Africa, Africa Occidentale Française. Here's another piece to Zinder, once again, out of Palestine, out of Jaffa. Here's an arrival postmark in Zinder, 1937. It's a surface letter. French Sudan, which is currently Mali. Here is a typograph stamp from Jaffa going to Sudan Française, appropriate postcard rate. So we're back in Africa. So we've covered a whole bunch of places in Africa. And some of you will say to me, Ed, are you showing all your pieces from Africa? And I'd say, I wish I was, because there are so many places still in Africa that I don't have. It's unbelievable. I keep thinking to myself, how many of these places in Africa was mail sent to? Here's a great piece going to Nigeria from Palestine. And it's got surface mail, beautiful color, typographical stamps, beautiful transit markings on the back, arrival postmarks. Another cover, first one was typographs. Here's a pictorial cover going to southern Nigeria, 1936, paying the airmail rate. This was surface the first time through. Now we've got airmail on the next piece. Now we're going to Nyasaland, and you're going, Nyasaland, where the heck is that? And that's Malawi. All of you know that, right? It's went on Ala Litoria, and it didn't have enough postage on it. So it didn't go by air. It ended up going by surface. 1940, went through Cairo, censored. Here's another piece that actually had enough postage. It was sent registered with a lot more postage in 1942, censored from Palestine to Nyasaland. Portuguese East Africa to the Portuguese colony from Palestine. Oh, that's Mozambique. We had all the M's, Madagascar, Mozambique, Mali. We have all these different places we're sending mail. Jerusalem going to Portuguese East Africa, 1939. Then we got a piece, Palestine to Réunion, in the Indian Ocean, near Madagascar, near Mauritius. And here's a spectacular piece, registered Palestine, sent by the great Joseph Cohen, who was a great philatelist. He sent mail all over the place. And here's a piece with the correct postage going to triple weight, going to Réunion, the only reported piece known from Palestine to Réunion, with arrival postmarks as well. Palestine to Northern Rhodesia, 1943 in this case, and Northern Rhodesia, Zambia in current world terms. Censored in this particular case. Palestine to Southern Rhodesia. Before we were in Northern Rhodesia in Zambia, now we're in Zimbabwe in today's terms. Previously Southern Rhodesia, Salisbury. 1944, correct postage plus registration. Now we're going to the island of St. Helena. And when I was a kid, we used to study all the explorers, and their ships always went around Africa, and Bartholomew Diaz and all these other explorers. And they stopped at St. Helena to get supplies, and they stopped at the Ascension Islands. And who would have thought that I would have a piece from Palestine to St. Helena in 1921, May 14th, 1921. And then the Ascension Islands, even crazier. Here's a piece, 1929, triple weight, Haifa to the Ascension Islands, arrival postmark in all likelihood. And I don't know how many people lived on the island because it's going to number 10 bungalow. I don't know if that was the extent of the bungalows on the Ascension Islands. There were soldiers who stationed there. It was a dependency of St. Helena. It was a UK colony. So that's the reason why mail was going there. Palestine to Sierra Leone. And who's it going to? Harry Luke, the colonial secretary. So we saw Harry Luke in Malta before. Now we see him in Sierra Leone. Here's a typograph stamp paying the surface rate. Here are arrival postmarks. Another piece to Sierra Leone. These are pictorial stamps going on KLM, going to Freetown. And it's 1938 in this particular case, double weight. Sierra Leone, the rate changes again. Airmail going in 1939 from Jerusalem to Freetown in Sierra Leone. Somaliland, formerly Italian Somaliland. And 1944, censored both sides of the cover, censorship marks in the middle of the cover, and it's paying the surface rate from Jaffa to Somaliland. Southwest Africa, here is an uprated postcard. Modern day Namibia, Palestine, 35 mils in this particular case by airmail. Palestine to Sudan, the UK protectorate, not French Sudan, but British Sudan. And this is 1939 in this case. There was an Air Force base there. And this was going, again, all all empire rate, all up rate. So that's why the postage is so low on this cover. Palestine to Sudan, the rate goes up significantly during World War I, 1941 in this particular case. Palestine to Tanganyika, to Dar es Salaam, now Tanzania. So before we always thought of it as Tanganyika, now then it became Tanzania. The postage, correct on this one, censored airmail cover, appropriate rate to the destination. Palestine to Libya, to Tripolitania, which was the Italian possession, in the north of Africa at the time. This was registered going out of Jerusalem. Look at the nice transit markings in this case. And then during the war, 1945, the former Italian colony, Middle East Forces, the MEF, they had taken over the area, and this was military mail going from Palestine, FPO 155, going to Middle East Forces in Tripolitania. Palestine to Tunisia, it's typograph stamps on surface mail, nice transit markings on the back. 1919, it's the military administration in Palestine, in Jerusalem, and EPC, which you see on covers, that stands for Egyptian Postal Censorship. So that's, when you see a cover with that, that's what it stands for. Great postal history cover, Palestine to Tunisia. And why is it a great postal history cover? Because this was supposed to go by foreign surface rate from Palestine, Tel Aviv to Tunis. The difficulty was that the Germans blockaded with the Italians Northern Africa along the coast. So when the mail got to Cairo, it couldn't be sent over to Tunisia. So they sent it over to Lisbon, where it sat for 2 years. And by the time they sent the mail over to Tunis, where the Germans had already left and the Italians had already left, then the person had already left. So the mail actually went back to Jerusalem. And that's why on the back of the cover, it has the return to. Palestine to Tunisia, this is a very interesting cover. There was a postal service that was established by the French consulate in Jerusalem when the Jewish-Arab conflict broke out in 1947. And the question was how the consulate was going to get mail back to France and to French possessions. This is a piece that was sent. It's a French stamp overprinted with a Jerusalem notation in this particular case, and it's going to Tunis. Palestine to Uganda, to Entebbe, the place that became famous because of Idi Amin and the hijacking of aircraft years later. This is 1935. It's going by airmail, by Imperial Airways. And Palestine to Zanzibar, now Tanzania. There is the appropriate Imperial Airways postage going by airmail down to Zanzibar. So we've now flown through Africa. We've gone through the jungles of Africa. We've gone through the savannah. We've gone through different places, and we're into the West Indies. And, I took a map here that had a nice modern boat. It had a nice old boat on it. It had someone who looked like a swashbuckler with a patch over his eye and a parrot. And let's go and look at the mail. Palestine to Aruba, postcard out of Jerusalem with an arrival postmark in Aruba, both on the front and the back. Palestine to the Bahamas, 1918. It's a piece that was registered coming out of a military field post office because World War I had just wound down. You see, it's November the 20th, 1918. Palestine to the Bahamas, and by the way, these aren't even typograph stamps, by the way. These were called the blues. These were the first stamps of Palestine that were issued in February of 1918. So then we have the pictorial stamps, and this is beautiful commercial mail going to the Royal Bank of Canada in Nassau, registered out of Jerusalem. So this is clearly commercial mail. Left side shows the censorship marking and the censorship tape. And this went by airmail, double weight. In this case, it's 1940, September. Italy is in the war, so this has to go by Pacific Clipper. So this goes from Palestine through Africa, through the Indian Ocean, down to Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, across the Pacific, over to the United States, and then to New York, and then down to the Bahamas. Palestine to Barbados. It's 1944, we're in the war. It's airmail. It's got an appropriate airmail rate. But the interesting thing here is people got the Bahamas and the Barbados mixed up. So instead of sending it to Barbados, it says missent to Bahamas. Palestine to the Barbados, well, at least this one got there, because in this particular case, the postage was much heavier. It was the appropriate rate at the time. It wasn't censored, interesting, going to Barbados, and goes by airmail. Palestine to Cuba, to Havana, registered out of Tel Aviv, going from Palestine, commercial mail, and it's double weight registered. Palestine to Curacao in the Dutch West Indies. Curacao, great commercial cover, another bank cover. This one's going to the Holland Bank in this particular case. This is censorship tape on the left side, private and confidential, but huge postage because this was paying 5 times weight. So there's no doubt there was commercial mail. This went through Miami. It went through the Canal Zone in order to get over to the Dutch West Indies. Palestine to the Dominican Republic. There was a settlement there where Jewish refugees went after the war in World War II. This is 1947. This was a letter sent to one of the refugees in that settlement. At this particular case, it traveled by air, and the air routes were interesting, going to the Caribbean at this time. Palestine to Haiti, 1928, pictorial stamp coming out of Tel Aviv, going to Port-au-Prince. There's the arrival postmark in Haiti. And here's a later piece going to Haiti, much heavier postage going to Haiti. It went on the airline BSAA via the Azores and Bermuda, Kingston, Jamaica, all the way to Haiti. Palestine to Jamaica, registered to Jamaica. And again, a commercial cover, a bank cover, Barclays Bank, censorship, and very heavy cover, double weight. And this went all over the place. And the reason is it's 1940 October. Remember, Italy's in the war. You got to go through Africa. You got to go across the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, across the United States, and down into the Caribbean. So the transit markings on the back of this were very interesting as well. Palestine to Martinique, Jerusalem to Martinique, not a very common destination, and an arrival postmark in 1939. This came, by the way, from Ramallah. So chances are this was someone who was a Arabic-speaking person based on the back flap and based on the location from which it was sent. Jerusalem to St. Kitts in the British West Indies. Typograph stamps on a postcard paying the appropriate postcard rate, 1922. St. Kitts, once again, instead of typograph stamps, which we saw here, we're seeing pictorial stamps. and it's bank mail once again, going from Barclays Bank to Barclays Bank. This was a bank in St. Kitts in the British West Indies, paying the surface rate at the time. Palestine to St. Lucia, registered to Castries in St. Lucia. This one was double weight. It's going to the Postmaster General, so it'd be curious to know what the nature of the mail was through there. But this did, because of the back of the cover, transit through many different places, Miami, amongst other things. Some of you will know that once the Clipper service shut down when Japan came into the Second World War, mail out of Palestine then went across Africa through Nigeria, over to the coast, and then crossed the Atlantic Ocean over to Brazil, up to Miami. And in this case, then it would have gone to the British West Indies, possibly out of New York. Palestine to the St. Thomas in the American Virgin Islands. And here's a piece, 1945, November, where after the war, and this is the correct rate, is 100, well, actually it was underfranked, but it still got there. The rate was 125, it should have been 150. Palestine to Trinidad, registered, censored, 60 mil. And what was the year that this went? Well, when you look at it, it's 1941, July. So as a result, this had to go through the Clipper service once again, all across the world to get to its destination. So now we're out of the West Indies and we're into South America. First one, the most interesting cover in the whole presentation, Palestine to Argentina. You look at this cover on the front at the top, it looks like it's going to 63 Empire Street, Providence, Rhode Island. And on the back of the cover, it's got 4 cancels in Buenos Aires. How the heck did it go from Providence, Rhode Island to Buenos Aires? And my suspicion is that when the reader in Palestine looked at this cover that has the typograph stamps on it, it read R.A. rather than R.I. because there's no notation for the USA. And as a result, it was sent to the Republic of Argentina, R.A. It's the only thing I can think of as to how the heck this cover got to Argentina. Palestine to Bolivia out of Bethlehem. Airmail rate censored, unusual to find pieces going to Bolivia. Palestine to British Guiana, 1918, late 1918, just before the war is over, out of Jerusalem, censored by the British, typograph stamp, not overprinted at the time, out of an army post office. The great thing here, there's an arrival postmark, 1919 in Georgetown. Then there's British Guiana pictorial cover, heavy postage, censored, opened by examiners in 2 different jurisdictions. 1942, it's going across West Africa through Miami to go over to South America. Palestine to Chile. What's interesting about that? Do you see any stamps on this cover? It's dated December 17th, 1917. This was one of the first letters sent from Jerusalem after the British occupied Jerusalem on December the 9th. The post office didn't open in Jerusalem until December 17th. It was a military post office, SZ 44, and mail was sent by civilians free of postage. So this is the earliest recorded free civilian mail, Jerusalem to Santiago, Chile. Jerusalem to Colombia, South America. It went, in this case, by airmail? No, it didn't. They crossed out the airmail etiquette and it went by surface because of the amount of postage that's on there. Palestine to Ecuador, registered to Quito in Ecuador. Hard to find mail to Ecuador. Hard to find mail to Nicaragua. Hard to find mail to the Honduras. Hard to find mail to Central America generally. Here's more mail to Ecuador in South America. This is single weight censored. Palestine to Paraguay, another tough destination. This is going in 1937 and it's going across Africa and flight across the Atlantic Ocean down into South America, Palestine to Peru. Typograph stamps, overprinted, 1922, appropriate 13 mil surface rate to Peru. Then here's Palestine to Peru with pictorial stamps, registered, censored, going during the war, 1944. It's going across Africa, across the Atlantic Ocean, over to Miami, or alternatively over to Brazil. Palestine to Suriname, to Dutch Guiana, in the Dutch colony there, to Paramaribo in Suriname, pictorial stamps from June 1926. And here's Suriname with pictorial stamps on it, registered 1943, once again, going across Africa, across the Atlantic to Brazil, Miami, etc. Finally, another Suriname to Dutch Guiana, 1945. The rate had changed. That's why I put it in as well. And you'll see an interesting censorship mark in Suriname itself. Palestine to Uruguay. Often you will see mail to Uruguay. It's not that uncommon. I put it in because of the time period within which it was sent, 1942. It was pictorial stamps going across West Africa. Palestine to Venezuela, once again, 1942, middle of the war, registered. It's got to find its way across Africa, censored, going by airmail. Now we're in Central America, not many countries, and I told you, hard to find Honduras, hard to find Nicaragua. What do we have? First one, Canal Zone. There's the Canal Zone that people like to travel through. Here's a cover, Palestine through the Canal Zone, Central America by Ala Latoria. Palestine to Costa Rica, there's Professor Cohen again, who sent that mail to Reunion. Now he's sending it to Costa Rica. And that's the appropriate surface rate to Costa Rica. That's typograph stamps that are overprinted. Here's Costa Rica, pictorial stamps coming out of Bethlehem, registered, transit markings out of New York. Palestine to El Salvador, to San Salvador, registered, 1944, middle of the war, it's got to go across West Africa again, all across Africa, across the Atlantic to Miami, and then to Central America. Palestine to Guatemala, looks like a ratty cover, but what a beautiful typographical registered cover to Guatemala. Look at those censorship markings. Look at those arrival markings, transit markings. Very, very nice. So we saw typograph stamps here. Now we see pictorial stamps. In 1944, middle of the war, another airmail piece that's going across Africa, across the Atlantic, over to Brazil, Miami. Palestine to Panama, 1929. This is a proper postcard rate. Arrival postmark in Colón in the Republic of Panama. We're not talking the Canal Zone. We're talking Republic of Panama. And here's a pictorial cover that's going by plane. There's a cachet that said it was transferred by plane, transferred through the United States down to Panama. So this was a pictorial postcard with arrival. This is pictorial stamps, registered, censorship, going to Panama. Now we're into Asia. Palestine to Afghanistan, very tough to get. Afghanistan, 1947 to Kandahar, registered out of Jerusalem. Palestine to Burma, to Rangoon, arrival postmark, 1935, went on Imperial Airways. Another piece, Palestine to Burma, 1933, should have flipped the slides around. Palestine to Ceylon, to Slave Island, Colombo, 1918. Here's one of the blues, the first Palestine stamp issued, paying the rate to Ceylon. Here's a pictorial stamp, 1940, censored, airmail, going through Karachi, which of course was India at the time, later Pakistan, but at the time, India. Palestine to China, registered, typograph stamp, overprinted, going to Shanghai, coming out of Jerusalem, 1921. Palestine to China, again, Jerusalem to Beijing. Lots of beautiful pictorial postage. 1935 goes through Hong Kong, and the etiquette is marked off, indicating that it only went so far in China and then would go otherwise by surface. So it actually went to Hong Kong and then surfaced to Beijing, or Peking at the time. French Indochina, we have Vietnam, or then French Indochina. So where's this going? To Saigon, from the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. And it was returned no service because the Japanese had gotten in at the time. So it was turned back. French Indochina, 1945, another piece, no service, trying to go to Indochina once again. And it was returned to sender, ended up in the dead letter office in Bombay and Madras. Palestine to Hong Kong, 1919, censored, typograph stamps, beautiful transit arrivals. Palestine to Hong Kong, 1920, the next year. It's registered this time, and there's the arrival postmark, typograph stamp, not overprinted. Third piece to Hong Kong, Palestine with pictorials, registered out of Hong Kong, transit markings, different places. Fourth piece, Palestine to Hong Kong, doesn't get there, postal communications suspended, registered, but it's got all the right amount of postage. It's censored. It's got censorship tape. It's supposed to go by email, by airmail, but it doesn't. Now here's Palestine to India. There's mail from Palestine to India. What's so special about this? It's going early airmail, 1926 to Baghdad, and then surface to Calcutta, just like that piece I showed you before about Iraq. Hard to get, Palestine to Japan, a postcard, regular postcard rate. Here's the marking for arrival, going through Egypt on the way to Japan. Palestine to Korea, that was annexed and ruled by Japan. You have the appropriate postage going to Korea, sent by a stamp dealer out of Tel Aviv, going through Hong Kong, going through Egypt. Another piece, Palestine to Korea, Jaffa, typograph stamps, paying the registration rate. And there's the arrival postmark there. Palestine to Korea postcard, 1940, and markings there indicating arrival, censorship. Palestine to Siam, to Thailand, to Bangkok, 1940, appropriate rate, airmail. Palestine to Turkey, uncommon? Not really, except for the destination here, the Princess Islands in Turkey, typograph stamps, 1921. Remember, the Ottoman Empire was breaking up at the time, 1922. So I threw that one in just because of its location. And finally, our last area, because I'm cognizant of the time, is Oceania or Oceania, for lack of a better term. Palestine to Australia. Lots of soldiers served in Palestine in the First World War for the Australian forces. This was a heavy letter going from Palestine, from one of the military post offices near Jaffa, registered to Melbourne, Australia, which is why I put it in, because you see all the nice markings and transit markings. Palestine to the Philippines, a US territory, going by airmail, and 1940, and it's going via Hong Kong. What's the date? January 1, 1940. So this could still go by the Clipper service, and which it did all the way from Palestine, all the way over to Hong Kong. Palestine to the Philippines, even earlier, 1936. This was a surface postcard, so I should have put that one after this one, and it paid the surface postcard rate. Palestine to the Dutch East Indies, different places that you might not even be able to name depending on what you collect. Palestine to Velterverden, but we're talking to the island of Java, you know, Dutch East Indies, typograph stamps. Dutch East Indies to Java again. And here we are with pictorial stamps going by airmail, 1933. So it's early KLM airmail. Palestine to Fiji. Look who it is again. It's Harry Luke again. Only now he's in Fiji. He was in Malta and Sierra Leone, and now he's in Fiji, and it's 1939 out of Jerusalem. The Federated Malay States. Can you name them? Here's Palestine 1918 with the blue stamps going to the Federated Malay States. And there are the different transit markings and the arrival postmark. The Malayan Union. Here's Palestine to the Malayan Union, registered 1947. Palestine to Singapore when it was part of the Strait Settlements. There's Professor Cohen again, 1921, sending typograph registration over to Penang and the Strait Settlements, and he gets a registration marking, and he gets the mark out of Jerusalem. Beautiful cover. Singapore to the Strait Settlements, first flight cover, leaving Gaza 1933, appropriate postage going on the airmail there, Imperial Airways at the time. Palestine to the Strait Settlements, 1947, trying to get to Penang, the right postage. However, it's 1948, and it doesn't make it, late 1947. First flight cover, no, yes, but more importantly, an all-up rate, an all-empire rate, 10 mils once again, like we saw, to Aden, amongst other jurisdictions before, and this is going to Singapore. The Marshall Islands, how many covers do you see from Palestine to the Marshall Islands? 1948, with a Jewish National Fund stamp on it, and actual pictorial postage. This is right before the State of Israel was declared, probably 10 days, less than 10 days before. Palestine to New Zealand to Dunedin, 1926, registered typograph stamps. Palestine to Hastings, New Zealand, registered with pictorial stamps. Quintuple rate coming from the winery in Palestine. So no doubt commercial mail. And finally, on this whirlwind journey, we end in Tahiti, where we should end. And that is Haifa to Papiti, 1947, registered, paying the appropriate surface rate plus registration. Joe, that takes me there.
Wow. So you are missing some countries?
Yep. There are always countries that are missing. You know, if I can find that piece to Djibouti or to Rio de Oro, you know, that'll be fine. I know that there are lots of people listening to this that are going to go, oh, I've got a piece to Upper Volta from Palestine, and I'll gladly send it to Ed, or to Tonga, or to Nauru, or to the Cook Islands. So there are some real exotic ones that are still missing.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I try to collect unusual destinations for my period in 1939 with Canadian stamps on it, and I've got 10 slides, not 190 slides or whatever that was. That's amazing. So we have a couple comments and questions here. So Jerry asks, read your comment about one of the covers being censored by the Egyptians. Don't remember which cover it was or what date was on the cover, but from what I know, in 1944, the censorship by the Egyptians was done on behalf of the British.
Correct.
That's correct.
That's correct. And that's really what I was saying. They, you know, in terms of the British forces outsourcing different functions, mail was often censored in Alexandria or Port Said or somewhere else.
Interesting. Do you know, Ed, do you have any earlier mail for Palestine? My only Palestine mail is a postcard sent from Jerusalem to Preston, Ontario, requesting support money for a poor man for a flowered item sent to raise money for his large family that he's unable to support. The franking of a Russian 4 kopeck stamp, overprinted 20 par, and the rate of a postcard in 1910, sent via the Russia post office in Jerusalem. I don't know how he had time to type all this stuff.
Well,
Jerusalem.
here's what I'm going to say to Lee. Yes, I have a whole collection of mail from Canada to Palestine that's pre-1920, and a collection of Palestine to Canada pre-1920. So I've got some pieces that are through the Russian post offices in Jerusalem or Jaffa. So if Lee, you want to send me a scan of the cover, I'm happy to give you some comments on it.
Neat. Many of the circular date stamps are poorly applied and would scare off the average collector because of the inability to read the postmarks, and also have foreign language, either Hebrew, Arabic, or other languages. This is fascinating, but our ability to dissect the rates to all the destinations, what kind of reference material do you use?
I use postal guides to the extent I have them. They're hard to find. I can read different languages, so that it does help. I also have a collection of postal history that I can use for purposes of trying to draw inferences. So if you find enough covers that are going to a particular place that have the same rate, then you can draw the inference that the rate you have is right. But you know, I've been in touch with collectors around the world who collect in this area, and you know, we share information about that kind of stuff. But the reason I enjoy the area is because it is a hunt. It is a challenge factor because of the languages, because of the postmarks, you know, as was written. So thank you for noticing that. But that's how we get the info. You know, and that's why we collect. It's fun.
Where do you find all this stuff?
Oh boy, it's been years of looking, and you know, you could find something on an auction site, and when I'm talking about like Del Camp or eBay or something like that, and no one wants it because it's surface mail and it's going to a small destination, and it's got a crappy postmark, and maybe the cover's been chewed by someone, you know, somewhere, and that doesn't dissuade me if I'm looking for a destination. But a lot of times you'll see this stuff in auction, and it's often a supply and demand thing. You know, some of these covers will sell for a little, some of them will sell for a lot. It really depends on how many people you're competing with. And a lot of people collect Palestine mandate postal history. Some of the people will collect the destination to which the mail is sent. So it really depends on who is actually in the fray as to who really wants something. And you know this, Joe, with your own collections. You know, I have a cover that you've seen that you like. And it's a Canada to Palestine cover.
Yep.
It's not, and I'm collecting it for that reason, and you're collecting it because you want the 1939 visit cover.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I remember that one, and it's also, if I remember right, an Empire Airmail rate cover.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So you know, you cross over with people, and that's what makes collecting postal history fun. Yeah. At least for me.
I know I enjoy it, and I know exactly what you're talking about. The hunt for the rare destination is something that I really enjoy as well. All right, well, thank you very much, Ed. It looks like we don't have any more questions. I'm going to stop the recording in a minute, and I'll bump everyone up so that everyone could look and talk and socialize a bit. But again, thank you very much. Thank you all people for coming, and thanks Sparks Auctions for for sponsoring us. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.